Thank you, Erica, and welcome everyone to a rather full banquet, if I can put it that way. I'm used to serving feasts, but this might actually be a banquet. So I beg your indulgence. Let me share my screen, which is that. And if I start from the beginning, so why are cosmos and man, divinity enfleshed? Let's meditate under the cool shade of the banyan tree. And we will meditate on this. The truth needed for immediate and provisional use may be learned from books and lectures and teachers. But the truth of the ultimate revelation can be learned only from and within oneself by meditation. So what are we going to talk about? Reasserting divinity in cosmos and man, which may seem an obvious thing to do, but the way some of science is going now, that might be a very urgent task for us, all of us. So in three parts, the unfolding of cosmos and the role of space, time, and matter. Anthropogenesis, the derivation of the human senses, the hard problem of consciousness, and this whole question of attaining immortality. How do we do it? Through scientific technology or spiritual evolution? So let's start, naturally, with, let me get my highlighter. Part one. Bearing in mind that the perennial philosophy is always the universal solvent and the solution to problems of all ages. How do we make a garment? We're all wearing clothes. How do we make a garment? It's made from physical cloth, and how do we weave it? We have the production of the raw fabric, achieved by the interweaving of the textile yarn, and that textile yarn comprises the weft, which is the yarn providing structural support, and the warp, which fills it out. And then we shape the raw woven fabric into a garment. That's done by the tailor, of course. So, duality is in nature the fabric and form of cosmos. Here's a physical analogy: raw material, and then shape it. Esoterically, we have the fabric and form of cosmos. The raw fabric is the stuff of cosmos, and then we have the form of cosmos. So let's do more weaving. Let's weave a cosmos. The physical analogy is you have the textile loom. To weave textile, you have the yarn, you need a tailor, and you need to shape it. Esoterically, we weave for God the garment. Now, a sort of connecting thread for my talk is going to be Goethe's beautiful saying, at the roaring loom of time I ply, and weave for God the garment thou knowest him by. So the textile loom is the roaring loom of time to weave universes by means of space and time, and then we shape it using the energy matter principle in order to weave the fabric of cosmos. So whether we weave a textile or a cosmos, you have the same principle. This is what you saw earlier. You have the warp and you have the weft going in between. Without one or the other, the thing would fall apart. You need both for stability. Esoterically, you saw that on the previous slide. So here we've woven the cosmos from space and time. Now, the production of the garment of cosmos, so to speak, is the role of energy and matter. It is the duality of energy matter to shape the fabric, the virgin fabric of cosmos, into a garment, so to speak, the universes, the numberless universes, visible and invisible. And science is now finding increasing corroboration from recent multiverse theories of cosmology on the esoteric principle of numberless universes. What is matter? This uncomfortable word, matter. Let's commence with a simple illustration from daily life. I'm going to mute this now because I want you to concentrate. Terms like matter are all abstractions, generalized terms and generic terms for hosts of living force entities acting aggregatively, collectively. Just as the human body is the material counterpart, or matter, to its indwelling soul and spirit, the body itself being an aggregation of hosts of living entities, which gives the impression of a unified being. So the visible effects of matter are in fact the effects of force. That which is now called matter is the aggregation of forces to which the word matter is used just to express it. In other words, what materialistic science calls and worships as matter, physical matter, is none other than the envelope or the outer skin of an aggregation of active forces. Nearly 3 centuries ago, the great Leibniz used remarkable metaphysical reasoning to prove that all matter could be reduced to a complex of forces. Modern physics is increasingly acknowledging this aggregation of forces nature of matter, and curiously regards interacting forces as the exchange of massless mediating particles, which they call gluons. For example, the graviton is the massless particle exchanged between bodies experiencing gravitational attraction. But massless, force-carrying particles are really tantamount to admitting an aggregation of forces. So let's try and show what we mean by an aggregation of forces. You're going to see just straight lines as the originant representing active forces. And what you see there is the resultant of just the straight lines, the active principle. The curve was not drawn. It was not drawn. I mean, I drew it for the picture, but if I take it away, the curve is really the outer skin, the resultant of the active forces, and therefore, in a sense, it is illusory, a mind product. Because if we rub out the straight lines, the curve will be eliminated with them. So the curve is a maya, an appearance. And here we have Einstein saying matter is conceived as being only space in a peculiar form, and we may regard matter as constituted by the regions of space where the field is very intense. There's no place in this new kind of physics for both field and matter, for the field is the only reality. And Heisenberg's dying words to his student were that physics is of no importance. No, well, he got a Nobel Prize for it, but it's of no importance because he now realizes that the world is illusion, using the word illusion, of course, in the deeply metaphysical sense, not in a silly sort of common everyday sense. So cosmos is the unfolding of consciousness as matter, not in matter. Just to recap, modern science has shown that space and time are not two separate, distinct absolutes, but two aspects of one fundamental underlying entity. Space-time is identical, so to speak, with mind consciousness, and it is identical with substance, matter. But the picture is not complete. The picture is completed when we realize that what appears to us as matter is so to speak, maya in manifestation. And the picture is completed only when we invoke and realize the primacy of mind stroke consciousness. So mind, space, time, substance are the products or appearance, even to our most exalted intellect, of that mystery we call reality or the nameless. So with all of that, how do we emanate the garment of cosmos? There is a beautiful ancient story, isn't there, in the Vedic legend, that in order that the world could be born, the creator Brahma fell into man and wife, Brahma and Sarasvati. In other words, became name and form. The two universal aspects of name and form are what the perennial wisdom refers to as the two modes of consciousness, one of time, the other of space. So the story of the one Brahma dividing into two is neo-Oriental imagery for, again, I remind you of Goethe's saying that at the roaring loom of time I ply, and weave for God the garment thou knowest him by. So space and time are doing the weaving of the fabric by which we see the garment, the expression of the divine. So let's weave it and emanate the cosmos. Realizing, of course, that for manifestation, we need the two correlating principles of the subjective and the objective, the mental phenomena and the physical mechanisms and phenomena, in order that we may emanate mind, thought, energy, matter. In other words, we move always in correlation, divine mind correlated with root matter, Mula Prakriti if you like, cosmic ideation, cosmic substance, mind, space. So we've woven our cosmos, we've got to live in it, as all creatures. Let's move on to anthropogenesis, the coming into being of man and his senses on earth. So the approach is going to be from external sensation to internal experience. How does that happen? And here the Samkhya philosophy of India, also mirrored in equivalent precepts from the New Testament, as all the great religions have derived from one source, so that's no surprise. So I'm going to take that approach embedded in the overarching esoteric philosophy, esoteric science. How do we make anything on earth? Literally, quite literally, how do you make anything on earth? Say you want to make or construct the Channel Tunnel, England to France or France to England, whoever side you happen to be on, hopefully neither. You must have a vision. You must have a vision. Then you must have a plan and an organization chart. The plan can be, well, nowadays on the computer or on a piece of paper, and you draw it out, and only then can you construct the physical product to correspond with the plan and the vision. So you have the vision reflected in the plan or model, reflected in the physical construction, which in turn mirrors the plan, which in turn mirrors the vision. So you have an active principle, call it spirit if you like. You have the physical expression, call it body if you like. And you have the interface. What are we going to call it? I think we'll call it soul. Now let's use exactly these principles to make a man. By way of esoteric engineering. These were the two pictures you saw on the previous slide. Invoking the Hermetic axiom, as above, so below, the vision is, if you like, the heavenly man, the original man, Adam Kadmon, Purusha, humanity as an idea. But humanity as an idea doesn't work to produce physical human beings unless you have a prototype, the archetypal man. So there is this overflowing of divine thought, the overflowing from there to there. The first is the realm of the ideative, the potency, man as thought in divine mind. The second reflects the forces in the macrocosm, not the potency, but the potentiality, the paradigm, the blueprint, humanity, not human beings, humanity. And only then can we have human beings, the inner being reflecting or projecting into the outer, the plane of action. So we move from man on heaven to physical man on earth. The ideative, the archetypal, and the physical. Now, you've seen this diagram in the Secret Doctrine, I'm sure, and you've looked at it many times. It's complicated, but all we need to concentrate on are the upper triangle, the ideative, the middle one, the archetypal, and reflected, the lower triangle, the brown one. In terms of the Sankhya philosophy, I've drawn it like this. Satchit Ananda, Purusha Prakriti, giving rise to Ahamkara, the individualized consciousness, the causal body, astral body, and the physical. I never cease to emphasize the unity of the mysteries. Unity doesn't mean uniformity, doesn't mean they're all the same. But you can easily discern the Sutratma thread, the connecting thread. So let's see this unity in what I've just presented. Here's that complicated, but yet rather simple diagram from the Secret Doctrine. The esoteric philosophy talks about the unmanifest logos, potential wisdom, and universal ideation, the 1 in 3. Samkhya, Satchit Ananda. Divine essence, omniscience, felicity. Christianity, Father, Son, Holy Ghost. Christos, not Christ, Christos as Trinity. Kabbalah, Ein Sof, Ein Sofur, Ein. And all of these are, in the various traditions, result in mind or intellect, procreation, and physical manifestation. So here you have the correspondence via the middle principle from the 3 in 1. My favorite quotation from Schiller, that the universe is a thought of the deity, and since this thought form has overflowed into actuality, the world born thereof has obviously realized the plan of its creator, and it's our task, if we are thinking beings, that is, to rediscover in the existent whole the original design. Now we come to this thorny problem of the human senses, which the great Schrödinger put so succinctly. And this is his quote, where he says that science cannot tell us a word about the experience of red and blue, bitter and sweet. It can't tell us why music delights us. It can tell us about the physical mechanisms whereby the air from the musical instrument strikes our eardrums, and then by virtue of the electrochemical processes, we experience music and we feel like crying. But the feelings of delight and sorrow, science is completely reticent because it is ignorant. And accordingly, we ask, if red has that wavelength, how do I experience red? How can I shut my eyes and still see a red rose? Equally, if music is merely sonorous air, how do these waves striking my eardrum move me to tears? And, surprisingly, how can I start crying even when I think of my beautiful tune, let alone hear it? What's going on? Now, in order to understand anything, we have to remove the impediments. That's fairly obvious. Neuroscience, virtually without exception, regards the mind as the product of the senses, when in fact it's the other way around. The esoteric philosophy uses the simile of the beehive and the bees, the queen bee and the bees. The mind is the queen bee. The senses are the bees that go out from the hive. So in this rather stylized diagram, the point to grasp is that the mind is not the product of the senses. The senses, like the bees that go out, have emanated from mind. Mind is the queen bee. And the other impediment was something written by the great neurologist Sir Francis Walsh, where he pointed out that we always confuse the instrument with the performing artist, so to speak. So consciousness and its vehicles of expression are confused and conflated. The two are obviously correlated, but they're not the same. Otherwise, you could say the violin and the piano plays itself. So carrying on from St. Francis Walsh's argument there, it'd be childish to identify the instrument with its user, even though the user be dependent. But this is exactly what's going on in science now. I mean, mainstream neuroscience, confusing the instrument with its user. So here again is my favorite expression. And how does that apply to anthropogenesis? Satchit Ananda the unmanifest, so to speak, in which ultimate space and eternal duration exist not as two things, but in unity. They are a not two, Mahakasha, Mahakala. But what manifests can never be divorced from when it manifests. So the what in space and its correlate, the when in time, are always inseparably coupled in the realm of manifestation at any level. So Satchit Ananda, reality is the origin of all mental images by differentiation and projection, so to speak. We have mental spaces correlated with mental time. This is the images of reality, hence illusions or Maya. Further externalizing, emanating, mental spaces, mental times as the continuously changing space-time orders on the different planes of manifestation in emanational descent to the physical plane of 3 dimensions of space and 1 dimension of time. So space pertains to the formation of mental images, whereas time is the succession of these mental images. Therefore, both space and time in manifestation depend on the mind and its mental images. So, when the mind is without images, there can be neither space nor time, only the real. So the various systems of yoga in the East and meditation all over have this central aim to quieten the mind by whatever technique, in order that reality may be glimpsed, however dimly, or for whatever length of time, depending on the depth and period of mental silence. And the word shadows is highly suggestive of that which is transitory and subject to change. Whether such change occurs in a fleeting moment, in years, or in aeons of time, corresponding, say, to the atomic level, the human lifetime, or planetary schemes, is not the issue. The issue is only the fact that it always happens, and it is for that reason that the shadows of reality, always transitory, are regarded as appearances or Maya. So, in summary, ultimate space and ultimate time are the two aspects of reality which weave the innumerable shadows of mental space and mental time on the different planes of manifestation. So we have some beautiful quotations. This is Goethe's quote. I've just put it in the form of a sort of definition of reality, if you like. The great Isaac Newton note how carefully he says he constitutes duration and space. And then the great Francis Bacon, I prefer to say Bacon rather than Shakespeare. So one of Paul Brunton's great sayings, we need to mentalize space and spatialize mind. Let's move on to the elusive topic of the tattvas. What are they? Defined in all sorts of ways, the quiddity of the European scholastics, in essence, it means the thatness, the quintessential reality, eternally existing. So The five cosmic elements in universal nature act as stimulators and receptors of the senses. So we have the element principles, the active spirit side, always correlated with the element substance on the matter side. So the active force side or spirit side of an element enables it to change or evolve as the world cycles roll on through the ages. That's why they're referred to as the element principles. And they're always correlated to the element substance. So the element principles are the indriyas, jnanendriyas, and karmendriyas. The indriya is the generic term for the five senses and their controlling faculty. The jnanendriyas are the five sense organs, not the physical organs, the noumena of the five sense organs by which we know and perceive the material world. And the karmendriyas are the five sense faculties for action. Thus, we perceive the world through the jnanendriyas, respond through the karmendriyas. Manas, the mind, is affected by what it perceives through the indriyas. But there has to be a vehicle, through which and with which to respond. And here it is. The element substances known as the tanmatras, the rudiments of the five element principles, the mahabhutas, the gross element principles, and the bhutas, the residual elements. Just see the drift of the argument. Don't get hooked on details because the detail is quite phenomenal. But the principle is really much simpler than one imagines. So tattva conveys the idea that there is a force side or a spirit side to the cosmic elements. At any level, then, spirit, generic term, requires matter, its appropriate vehicle. So the tanmatras and the mahabhutas convey the vehicular or matter side of the cosmic element principles, which proceed step by step with the changing world order. In other words, the matter side or vehicular side aspect of the original element principle has, by progressive descent and externalizing towards an increasing materiality, developed or become the gross element principle and is present on Earth at the current stage of evolution. So let's just remind ourselves of what we've said. Both sets of five faculties are correlated with the five elements, ether, air, fire, water, and earth. And no doubt you guessed the five human senses. And it's important to appreciate, very important, that the tattvas, tanmatras, and their unfolding correspondences are not mere abstract principles, but conscious principles. And for this reason, they are called devatas, or gods in the plural, in Indian philosophy. And on account of the intimate relation of consciousness with sound, vibration, their powers can be invoked and the corresponding force brought down on different planes, including the physical, in order to bring about specific results through a knowledge of the correspondences and correlations of consciousness with sound and color. So nature spirits, otherwise known popularly as elementals, are the agents of the cosmic elements, And they are incorporeal Devic entities concerned with building and maintaining the various forms of the kingdoms of nature. The Devas are angelic members of the hierarchy of beings parallel to man, and this is indeed the basis of genuine magic, practical magic, which is best left untouched by anyone other than he or she who has not developed the supreme qualities of purity and altruism, so that the powers invoked and then evoked could be handled responsibly. But we're not going to do that or try that. But the important thing is to see in human beings the nature of human sensation and where subject meets object. So viewing as a whole, the top blue ovoid shows parallel designations from different cultures used to pronounce the fact that truth is in effect quite ineffable. But externalizing or emanating, we have this differentiation that's needed for manifestation. So the mind works not only through the subject-object relationship, but in its involution divides into two streams, so to say, one stream serving as the basis of the objective function, and the other stream as the basis of the objective function. So you have the subjective, so-called assent, and the objective. This does not mean that there are two independent streams of descent. That's very important to understand. There is a singular emanational process eternally in action, and the two parallel lines are drawn purely for diagrammatic purposes to portray really the two aspects of one reality, the active principle and its correlate, the matter side. And that is one reason why, one possible reason why the masters came up with this strange saying, we believe in matter alone. Obviously, they were not referring to physical matter. They were referring to this matter principle. So continuing downwards, so to speak, we have Purusha, the archetypal man, the sons of God, and we have Prakriti, primordial substance, nature or matter. And then carrying on, the unit of heavenly man and nature, Purusha Prakriti, appears as individualized consciousness, as a sort of spiritual atom in the heart of each person, where its lower reflection gives rise to ahamkara, the feeling of I am I. Recall the story, the Greeks, in the Greek legend, of the god Bacchus, fascinated by and with his own image. When you're fascinated with your own image, you say, I am I. You don't say, I am all. So then here come the five cosmic elements, the subjective and objective aspects of which are or comprise the causal body, the subjective aspect of mind, the objective aspect of mind, and at their meeting point, we have the element principles joining with the element substances, such that the astral body is formed, and then the physical body with its five senses. Most importantly, and here's the clue to what I call the Schrödinger mind sensation problem, it's at the meeting of the subjective and objective aspects of mind at their lowest level that provides the experience of the physical universe through the five physical sense organs by means of the interface function of prana. So the indriyas and the tanmatras meet at the lowest level of descent, and it is at their conjunction that mind in its subjective aspect conjoins with mind in its objective aspect, such that a subjective perception or an experience of an objective universe can take place. And in summary, it is precisely at this conjunction of the two streams where we find the clue that the universe is a phenomenon in consciousness or of consciousness. And for this reason, the perception of the whole manifested universe in its infinite states of subtlety, right down to the physical, is the result of the involution of consciousness as matter, not in matter. So, to reiterate, a phenomenon of pure consciousness. And this is, of course, a very cursory account. So let's see the whole process as a whole. Everything here is noetic, meaning there is no body organ associated with these processes. Recall David Bohm's great quotation, if I may put it that way, that only the physical senses and body require a physical organ, but the rest of us is noetic. Here's another depiction of the Samkhya philosophy. We had Satchitananda, we have Brahman here, the countless monads, the Purusha and Prakriti, emanating the higher mind, the principle of Ahamkara, the lower mind, five senses, the tanmatras, and the five elements. So, in scientific terms, consciousness and matter are co-primaries. In secret doctrine terms, if you like, Parabrahm and Mula Prakriti. So let's see the whole thing quickly as a whole. A quick word now on prana. Life is more than just physical chemistry. The great Nobel physiologist wrote the following, that if all the tissues of the human body were treated in this way, the way he treated them, it would take 45,000 gallons of circulating fluid to keep them from being poisoned in a few days by their own waste products. Within the living organism, the blood achieves the same task with 1.5 gallons. So what's going on? Any person who is not so mesmerized by materialistic concepts would draw breath and ask the deeper question, what unique properties does the blood possess that cannot be explained by physics and chemistry unaided? So what is prana? There's a lot on prana, of course. What's missing? It's intimately associated with the blood, of course, and we know it's the vital force, the life force flowing in the subtler counterparts of the physical, as the great Newton intuited in his General Scholium, where he talked about a certain most subtle spirit which pervades and lies hid in all gross bodies. By means of which the outward organs of senses to the brain and from the brain to the muscles is commanded by the spirit. But these things cannot be explained in a few words, and least of all in a 20-minute TED talk, which I rather dislike, actually, to be honest, because they get so superficial, in my opinion, and they aimed far more on presentation than on content. But this is certainly not a TED talk, God forbid. In The Secret Doctrine, you will find this, which Blavatsky took from popular science. You can read it. Sir Benjamin Ward Richardson, the Fellow of the Royal Society, saying essentially what Newton is saying in 2019, as Newton said it much earlier, centuries earlier. And the references to this are by Paracelsus, by Franz Hartmann, who worked in ADIA, I believe, with HBB, who was the first person to translate the Bhagavad Gita into German. And here you have the Paracelsus references, of course. So the answer to Schrodinger's question or conundrum, or how can music delight us, even though we know the vibrations of air are only frequencies, and how does a red rose, how do we experience a red rose, even though we know the frequency of the color red? Well, again, let Newton start. Where the whole thrust of the argument is that our minds mirror the cosmic mind by whatever terms you wish to use. And Schrödinger himself said, when we recognize that Atman equals Brahman, the personal self equals the omnipresent, all-comprehending eternal self, then we understand why we experience things that we cannot explain physically. So now how do we attain immortality? Very quickly, the two approaches, through scientific technology or through spiritual evolution. Well, scientific technology, very quickly, is really the idea of the cyborg, the idea of the man-machine interface and combination. And in my opinion, transhumanism is one of the ugliest and most dangerous burgeoning subjects in science today. The whole idea that you can implant chips and by way of genetic modification infinitely prolong human life. And associated with that is the idea of cryonics, which means freezing a body in liquid nitrogen. And some people, I'm not joking, have elected to have their head and body severed, frozen separately, in the hope that when science advances at a future date, the two can be reunited. We ask, what sort of consciousness, if any, would the reunited monster experience? And we can ask a whole load of other questions which are irrelevant for our purposes. But I find this movement, which is growing because technology is growing, I find it one of the ugliest manifestations of current scientific materialism. On the other side, of course, there is wonderful work going on in science, exploring the boundaries of consciousness and demonstrating increasingly that extended mind, universal mind, are not mere fanciful ideas, but they can actually be shown to be true. And that work, of course, comes from near-death experiences, out-of-body experiences, and a lot of other work. Spiritual evolution is obvious. It means shedding the outer form so that the indwelling consciousness may seek newer forms in just the same way as you throw your clothes at the end of the day into the washing machine or whatever and put on a new set of clothes the next day. It's only the clothes that have changed. You have not changed, or rather, you might well have grown in the interval. So, spiritual evolution is obviously the shedding of form, which is always transient, transitory, in order that the immortal, permanent, indwelling consciousness may seek newer forms for its limitless and continuing evolution. So just to summarize, the transhumanism, genetic and software enhancement, the idea started from the geneticist Haldane, Lighthill, and Julian Huxley. Julian Huxley, the brother of Aldous Huxley, who coined the word perennial philosophy. And if you think I'm exaggerating, I assure you it's a strong movement in Oxford University. Digital immortality is the latest idea being taken very seriously, where you download the contents of your brain, meaning or brain waves, into a massive computer, hopefully to reload it back when science advances to such a stage where you can recover your previous life. If that sounds idiotic, well, it's going on now. I mean, the ideas and the research associated with it. And cryonics is revival of a frozen body. But I ask a much deeper question. What is the inner driving force behind, excuse the spelling, wanting to be immortal? Why do people want to be immortal, even though they associate immortality entirely with the physical body? Why do they want to be immortal? We much prefer spiritual evolution, consciousness expressing through renewal of its vestures. Look what the immortal Mozart said to his father at the age of 35. I always remember Krishnamurti when speaking at Brockwood Park. On the last day of his talk, invariably, it was a beautiful sunny day, he said, now we're going to talk about death. And this is, I'm sure, what he was getting at. Death is an expansion of consciousness, not an extinction of consciousness. So, in shorter words, this is what Blavatsky said, the same as Mozart. And the Ouroboros symbol is the whole course of evolution bears witness to the principle of dying for the sake of life. This beautiful aphorism from Rumi, with which I thank you for accompanying me on the journey.
Thank you so much, Eddie, for such an inspiring lecture with so many philosophical questions.